Hello, dear brothers and sisters. I want to welcome you back to a new Bible study, and I'm glad you're joining again. I hope and pray these Bible studies will help and learn you a lot. And let's continue with Habakkuk 3, verse 5 and 6. And this Bible study is about YHWH, the all-powerful and eternal comes. Habakkuk 3, verse 5 and 6. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled, and the age-old hills collapsed. But he marches on forever. Let's first dive into some context and background. In the last video, Habakkuk sung of the splendor and brilliance of God. Today, he begins to recount God's awesome power and strength. Verses 3, Habakkuk 3 verse 5 to 15 also employs many military terms, making God out to be a warrior God figure. We see the YHWH shaking the earth, riding horses and chariots, using a bow and arrows, using a spear, crushing his enemies, marching, and so more. As we touched on in the last study, many view the psalm as Habakkuk, from Habakkuk, that is poetically referring back to the ancient curses of the covenant, as we can read in Deuteronomy 28. These curses would be rained down on God's people if they didn't obey the commandments of God. The prophet seems to have reconciled himself to the righteousness of God's actions to devastate Judah, because he had warned them ahead of time, over and over, what would happen if they turned away from YHWH. Others believe that Habakkuk is recounting to the Israelites God's past mighty, giving them a hope for the future. Instead of a curse, it's an encouragement that they are still God's people. And still others view the psalm as a futuristic and prophetic, and see all allusions in Daniel and Revelation and other New Testament passages. We will speak about all three as these verses permit. Okay, let's dive into some interesting points. Plague went before him, pestilence followed his steps. Now, the Lord actually arrives on the scene. Indications of his approach had first been seen from a distance in the terms of the radiance of his glory filling the earth. But now that the Almighty has arrived, and it becomes evident that he is not simply something just to be observed. Instead of majesty and brilliance, this verse reveals judgment and wrath. Plague and pestilence are definitely part of the curses proclaimed by Moses. In Deuteronomy 28, we read, "The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt, and with tumors, festering sores, and the itch, from which you cannot be cured." This could also refer to the events of the Exodus, where God sent plagues and pestilence to push the Egyptians to grant the Israelites freedom and let them go. In the same sense, God will also rain down ruin on all of God's enemies, particularly the Babylonians. Okay, the second interesting point. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The scope of this judgment embraces the whole earth, which is shaken by earthquakes and volcanic upheavals. The result of such judgment and physical upheaval will also be inflicted among the nations. This infliction will cause the world to tremble, which implies both emotional turmoil and abrupt physical disruption. For For those that take a far future view, these images parallel with what we read in 2 Peter 3. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done it will be laid bare. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the element will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. And another one is that we are told in Revelation, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all tribes of the earth will on account of him. Even so, Amen." Then the third interesting point. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed, but he marches on forever. When the Lord shows up, the ancient mountains and hills are shattered and collapse. Revelation also uses much the similar imagery. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island will be removed from its place. And also, every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. We can read this in Revelation 6, verse 20. More importantly, Habakkuk follows the description of these crumbling, age-old hills with the counterpoint, his ways are eternal, as we can read in Habakkuk 3, verse 6. As we have studied in the past, God is eternal. He has no beginning, and he will have no end. While the mountains and hills are symbols of stability, permanence, and age on the earth, yet they will crumble. They are not permanent. However, Yahweh marches on forever, as the psalmists sing, "Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." We can read this in Psalm 90, verse 2. Okay, brothers, this application is adapted from Spurgeon. The ways of people are temporary and changeable, but God's ways are everlasting and consistent. For us, these should be very comforting truths. Why? First of all, the ways of God are based on full knowledge, understanding, and wise deliberation. He organizes things in his own way, his own timing, and his own will. Human actions are frequently based on impulse, passion, or fear. Often we find that we regret our hasty actions and must change our mind or direction. But nothing can surprise the Lord, and always happens based on what He has foreseen. Additionally, God is eternal, just, gracious, faithful, loving, and wise. Knowing this, I often wonder why we are not as trusting of God as we should be. He knows the past, the present, and the future, and He also knows us far better than we know ourselves. When the prophet Habakkuk sings in Habakkuk 3 verse 6, he marches on forever, and that you came out to deliver your people, we should feel comforted. Take time to meditate on this. Realize that we are in the arms of the Almighty, and no matter what happens, it is all known and planned by God. It is comforting to know that He loves us and desires the best for us. Ask God today to give you His eyes to see yourself as He does. May God bless you all in doing this, and I hope to see you back in the next video. God bless you all.